Before we get going, we're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to a subscriber that comments on this video, and for at least a while, we're going to be doing it on every video. So subscribe and comment on all of them. We live in a time of shared cinematic universes, but before that, crossovers were kind of a big deal. I'm Falcon, and today on Waste Time, 10 surprising movie crossovers. Number 10, speaking of cinematic universes, the first crossover we want to talk about is a bunch of old movies that are going to become a cinematic universe. You see, all the classic Universal monster movies actually had a lot of crossovers, and in some cases kinda seemed like a predecessor to the idea of a cinematic universe, although this was 80 plus years ago. In movies like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman or House of Dracula, you would see multiple Universal monster properties come together into one movie, usually end up doing something that's absolutely absurd, and audiences loved it. It's actually kind of weird that it took 80 years to come up with the idea of a cinematic universe, and that comics are where the idea was derived from and not the original Universal movies. No worry, Universal is doing the Dark Universe, which is a cinematic universe with all of the old monster movies in it. You probably could have seen that coming a mile away though. Number 9, this is kind of a abstract crossover, seeing as it never really happens directly in film, but most of the films that John Hughes has written and directed all take place in the same universe. Not necessarily a cinematic universe, because the idea is usually to converge at some point with those, but he wrote these movies to take place, all relating to a single town called Shermer, Illinois. 16 Candles takes place explicitly there. A lot of Ferris Bueller's Day Off takes place there, although they do go into Chicago as well, implying that it may be a suburb of Chicago in this world. Uncle Buck takes place in Shermer, Illinois. John Candy's character in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles also comes from Shermer, Illinois. I could go on about it, but that would be a list within a list. We don't need to do that. Waste Time is not a cinematic universe. Number 8, Jay and Silent Bob from the Kevin Smith movies show up in Scream 3. They're touring a movie lot and happen to mistake a newscaster for someone else, say something sarcastic, everybody laughs. Hooray, hurrah, Bob's your uncle. Not this Bob. An anecdotal Bob. There's some contention with whether or not this places the Scream movies in the same universe as the Kevin Smith movies, but Kevin Smith has kind of poo-pooed on the idea himself, so probably not. Still, cool crossover. Number 7, Terminator and Alien, and Predator, and The Abyss. Now, Terminator and The Abyss is a little more apparent. There's a corporation that very obviously exists in both movies, but in the script for Aliens, there are actually mentions of Cyberdyne Systems, the company that created the Terminator. There's one more piece to the puzzle. In 1994, a game called Alien vs. Predator, which was not related to the movie that came out about a decade or so later, Dutch, the main character of Predator, was no longer a human being. So there's a theory he was somehow an experiment to find the perfect soldier to base the Terminator off of. The reason for this is his code name in the video game is CDS-170A3. CDS could mean Cyberdyne Systems. As you go through these theories, there's progressively a little bit less evidence, but I think the Alien and Terminator link is pretty sound. The only reason it's not Cyberdyne Systems is because Aliens and Terminator were owned by different companies and it would have been copyright infringement. In Aliens, they're called Hyperdyne, and fans sort of regard them as an evolution of Cyberdyne, probably what happened after the events of T2. It's wild, isn't it? Number 6, there's a crossover between the reboot of Friday the 13th and Transformers. There's a real douche nozzle in Transformers by the name of Trent DeMarco. He gets dumped by Michaela and basically has nothing to do with anything at that point. But in Friday the 13th, which came out 2 years later, the same actor played a character named Trent. Now, there was groundwork laid in the ever so douchey performance in Transformers. Just to make sure that you were like, okay, this guy is Trent, and I want him to die. They made sure that nothing was different about him, including the vehicle he drove. It was nearly the same truck. And sorry if you haven't seen an 8-year-old movie, but he dies and it's very satisfying. Number 5, there's a theory that Sean Connery's character in The Rock is actually James Bond. In the movie, his name is John Mason, but that's not terribly relevant. The idea is that James Bond was caught spying in the United States and ended up in Alcatraz when he was locked up. The FBI director in the movie introduces Mason fairly dramatically. A British national incarcerated on Alcatraz in 1962 escaped in 63. This man has no identity, not in the United States or Great Britain. He does not exist. Understand? There's a few other clues, including the timeline, Mason saying he was trained by British intelligence, the best, obviously, and it actually plays into a few interesting James Bond theories. But that's not what we're here for today. Number 4, Star Wars and E.T. have a very interesting connection. In E.T., in Elliot's room, he has a Boba Fett doll. Now, that's not the crossover. It is a crossover, but that's not the crossover. On Halloween in E.T., somebody's dressed as Yoda, and E.T. starts yelling, "Home! Home!" Now, this doesn't mean E.T. is from the Star Wars galaxy far, far away, or at least that it was intended to be that at that point. I mean, it was most likely meant to just be an homage. Spielberg and Lucas are friends, but Lucas wasn't content with that. In 1999, The Phantom Menace came out, and the Senate, the Galactic Senate, something we had all wanted to see for a very long time, had representatives from many different species. One of those species was the one that E.T. was from. Just participating in the Senate, that's all. It's one of those things that kind of makes you look at the movies differently, and I'd say in a positive way, although it was still very weird because E.T. was a thing of my childhood. But you also have to keep in mind that E.T. is supposed to happen in our real world, and Star Wars is supposed to happen in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago. Technically, Star Wars isn't supposed to be a different universe than ours, just a different galaxy and era. So, yeah. Number 3, Terminator shares Alien with Blade Runner, although Terminator's crossovers are from Aliens because that's the one that Cameron did. Alien was directed by Ridley Scott, who also directed Blade Runner, and there's a large number of indications those two films exist in the same universe. Namely, there's a fair amount of tech shared, there's software like the Purge screen, and docking mechanisms on vehicles, which, because the two Alien movies exist in the same universe, puts Blade Runner, Terminator, Alien, The Abyss, and probably some other movies, I don't even know, in a fairly likely shared universe, which is borderline bizarre because, in all likelihood, some of it is unintentional, or just a goof, or a fun little nod to another film. It's pretty interesting to me. Number 2, in Spy Kids, a kid movie, and the movie Machete, Danny Trejo plays the character Machete. Now, both Spy Kids and Machete are directed by the same director, Robert Rodriguez. Now, the interesting thing to think about is that Machete actually appeared in 3 Spy Kids movies before appearing in a movie called Machete. By that standard, Machete is a children's character who is then turned into an incredibly violent adult character. But let's be frank, who cares? This is perhaps one of the coolest things that's ever happened, even if you don't like Spy Kids. And finally, there's a Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez shared universe. Well, it's actually kind of 2 universes. Or maybe you could call it an Inception universe. There's the main universe, which is a Tarantino filmed universe, which contains a separate universe that is a bunch of films within the universe. The main universe is Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, and a few other mainline movies, while the movie-in-movie universe is the Kill Bill films, Machete, and, get this, Spy Kids. Now, it actually gets a lot more bizarre and complex, and I'm not going to try to explain it in depth because we could literally be here for hours, because it is a dual-layered cinematic universe that is actually consistent, which is seemingly impossible. What are your favorite crossovers in movies? Whether it's from this list or it's just something you thought of while watching, leave us a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, click like. We make new videos all the time, so now would be a great time to subscribe if you haven't, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on Waste Time.